All right. Today I'm joined by Sam Moore, president of Practice Elevation. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
We were just having such a good conversation. I was like, we got to hit record because you're
Yeah.
already getting into so much good stuff.
Well, you got me started,
Yeah,
so
I know. I was like, these are all such good nuggets we're talking about.
yeah.
But yeah, we'll get into it. Love to hear more about kind of your story, your journey, and kind of where you kind of see things heading in the marketing industry. But love to kind of just start off with kind of background, like what led to you starting your own marketing agency, and kind of what are you doing today?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, it hasn't been a straight path. I mean, I didn't sort of grow up wanting to do this. I was in the production space doing before the computer in New York, working for advertisers and publishers. Then desktop publishing came out. I jumped on that, and some colleagues of mine did not. So that was the first major upheaval that we went through. I freelanced for a while, and then I got a permalance job at MTV. I worked for two big agencies. Well, one was a boutique agency, but working with Fortune 100 brands, doing a lot of promotional stuff, and I was running the studio there. And then I worked for a network agency for 4 years. That was Pepsi, Frito Lay, brands like that. And then in 2008, the wheels came off, and I'd been around too long. They sacked everybody who was making over a certain amount. So by necessity, I sort of hung out my own shingle, and for a while there, it was tough. I did some consulting work, I did some production work, I did a lot of web development because I had kind of transitioned into that at my last agency job. Um, but doing that as a solo is tough. And I think it was David Baker who once noted that when agencies grow really quickly, it's usually because of a single customer. I was fortunate to get walked into a relationship with a major healthcare brand about 8 or 9 years ago now. And we built up an agency presence around their needs. Essentially, they were going through this massive digital transformation, and their digital presence was horrible, and they knew it. The CMO came in and said, we got to fix this. Okay. So we became their developers and their content managers, essentially, for their new digital presence. That transition is pretty much in good shape right now. So our engagement with them is winding down. We're still doing a lot of content management work. But I looked at this and said, well, where are we going here? And web development is not the hot ticket that it once was. We've been through that a few times. I mean, there was a time when Quark Illustrator and Photoshop were hot tickets, and I made a good living because I knew how to do that stuff.
Mhm.
Now you can buy that on Fiverr. So things become hot, they become important to the industry, and then they sort of become commoditized, and you move on to something else. It was web development, it was mobile, now it's AI. So there's always something to jump on. We looked at the existing industry and realized that I really can't support on a full-time basis the level of development staff that I was supporting, and I don't really want to try to swim upstream against that. What I see is a kind of a real softening in the web development space right now. So what we're looking at right now is three areas: premium branding, elevating a brand to be the go-to choice in their marketplace. And we're trained on that. We're a story brand agency. You know what story brand is. The second one is operations through agentic AI, and we're partnering with some very smart people on that. And the third area is, oh, what do I do with this business after I've been doing this for 40 years and I don't want to do it anymore?
Mm.
Right. So, what's my exit strategy going to look like? And I have a connection with a group that does mergers and acquisitions for small businesses. Very, very powerful content there. So we're going to market offering these three things. The brand messaging part of it is going to launch fairly soon. We're going to start pushing content to our YouTube channel and our Facebook ads and all that stuff within the next month or so. And the other two aspects of that are going to come to market later because we can't do everything at once. But that's where I see us going right now. Is that consulting and training stance it's what the market is hungering for right now because a lot of people are really confused.
Mm.
And it offers us the opportunity to really, get people to where they need to go in order to use our production services. We can do your marketing for you. We will run your Facebook ads. We will do your social and your YouTube. But we need you to know what you want first, which is why we want to train our customer base. So in terms, getting back to your original question, sorry, that was a big loop there, about where I see marketing going. I think a couple of things. First of all, there's going to be a lot more agentic AI. Everybody knows this. This is not a secret. But what are we going to do with it? A lot of marketing agencies have made a lot of money using skills and techniques over time, and those are going to be replaced. My technique and skill in cutting maths and using a ruling pen and all that kind of stuff before the computer went bye-bye in no time. We're going to see a lot of that happening in marketing too. So where people are making a lot of money running Facebook ad campaigns, a lot of that is going to soften up because you're going to be able to press a button and do a lot of the same thing. Even if it's 80%, the cost is going to be 10% of what you're paying now. So a lot of that is going to go bye-bye. So the strategic work is going to become more important though. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One is that AI can help you with your strategy, but it can't really help you with authenticity. It can't help you with relationships. It can't help you connect to other humans. We're still way better at that than computers are. And you can kind of tell. I think that authenticity, accountability is another big one. AIs are trained to make you feel good. So, yeah, great job. Yeah, okay, that's correct. Yeah, oh, sorry, I got that wrong. I'll fix that. It's basically walking around, kissing you all the time. It's not going to hold you accountable. What an effective consultant or an effective agency relationship does is you can have those ugly baby meetings. Okay, you can look at a business from the outside. You can bring in analogies from wildly disparate areas, welding. I mean, and look at how that applies to a business. AI is probably not going to be able to do that anytime soon. And that's where the human intelligence of the senior experienced marketers who have seen a lot, they've seen your problem 20 times, maybe a little different, maybe, every business is different, but they're going to be able to bring that insight, that right brain creativity to a business in a way that the computers just can't do, at least not yet. I mean, maybe one day, well, we won't need to do anything, but we're not there yet. So I think marketing is going to have to rely much more on insight, on creativity, on knowing how to create relationships, and cutting through if you'll forgive me, automated bullshit. I mean,
Yeah.
there is so much communication out there, and so much of it is worthless, and it's getting worse. So, as marketers, we need to find ways around that, or under it, or through it, or whatever preposition you want to use. We need to get past that and bring our real humanity and the humanity of our brands to their customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think the businesses and the marketers that succeed in this next phase of technology development are going to be the strategic thinkers that understand how to use the tool, but also how to connect and resonate with the like bridge the gap between the brand and the customer and make those connections in a very human led and focused way that but still being able to use the agentic AI platforms and tools in order to do more faster, better, and at a
Hmm.
lower cost.
Yeah.
And I think the ones who can bridge that are going to be the ones that succeed. Do you see, I know you've kind of focused on like healthcare has been a big focus of yours. Is that still your plan to really focus on that in this next phase where you kind of had your three-part phase of implementations like the branding, the consulting, the how to infuse AI. Do you see healthcare as kind of the main focus? And do you think there's going to be certain industries that are going to be more affected by kind of the AI development that marketing companies shouldn't even focus on going after? Like, what are the big
Mm.
verticals or niches that marketers should go after and try to focus on supporting, and which ones maybe they shouldn't avoid? And like healthcare, I think is probably going to be a big one still because everybody's still going to need their doctor, they're going to need their dentist, and that's going to be an industry that isn't marketing led or first, and still needs support. So I think that's a really good industry or vertical to be focused on. But
Yeah.
is that an industry you're still focused on? Like what do you think there's industries going to be like more or less affected by kind of this next evolution of tech we're in?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think a lot of industries are going to be affected differently. It depends on how much sort of repetitive stuff they do in order to keep the wheels churning. Healthcare has been deeply affected by this over time because of internal operations, patient records and things of that nature. I mean, despite all this intelligence that's out there in the computer world, we have all these disparate systems that just are really difficult
Hmm.
to use and to get to talk to each other. I know somebody who's a consultant who just ties systems together. That's all she does. And she works in Europe and they've got, multiple different platforms. Here in the US we have things like Epic and so forth, MyChart and so forth. And, going forward we're going to have to do things like these wearables. My Apple Health thing should be talking to my doctor. They should be able to see what my heart rate was every day for the last 2 years.
Right.
We're not there yet. So they're struggling big time with that. And to your point, they are not a marketing first industry, but marketing is very important. And our focus is moving less from the enterprise, which is our history, into smaller practices that may be struggling just to figure out what to do. They may not have a marketing department, or they may have one person. From that point of view, it might look like, premium branding, for example, is a luxury. And if you ignore that and you don't pay attention to that, you wind up competing on price, or just having customers who are just shopping around. They'll go to this person and that person, and there's no loyalty, there's no long-term relationship. I think the enterprise healthcare companies are better at that because they have big marketing departments and big budgets. So they can think about that kind of thing. They can hire a marketer at, mid six figures who's going to be thinking that way. Smaller companies, not so much. And I'm excited about the idea of sort of bringing the gift of fire to these, smaller practices, doing, let's say, 1 million plus a year, not a billion, who actually need some expert help from an agency that can guide them as to how to build the brand, how to increase margins through better operations, and how to value the company. They probably don't have any resources around that, or if they do, they're pretty thin. Now, we're staying in healthcare because that's our recent history for the last 8 or 9 years or so, and we feel like we know that space pretty well. There's no reason we wouldn't eventually be working with lawyers and CPAs and so forth.
Yeah,
We are, by
Jason.
the way, also focusing on what we call luxury healthcare, which is it's almost all out of pocket. It's cosmetic surgery, cosmetic dentistry, injections, HRT, things of that nature. Because when you get into the insured coverage, then you got a whole another ball of wax to deal with. We're not prepared to tackle that yet. And again, to your earlier point, we were talking about roll-ups, right? A lot of those smaller providers, like the walk-in clinics, those are now being provided by the big multi-billion-dollar health conglomerates now. They probably don't need our help, at least not at that level.
Yeah, do you see that being an upcoming challenge? Is if a lot of the small clinics sell to groups that own hundreds and thousands of clinics, that they try to start consolidating their
Yeah,
marketing,
it
HR, all
could.
the
It could be a challenge for us. So, of course, we'd be happy to work with the people who are doing the roll-ups too.
mhm,
I mean, they also need to market.
yeah, and they're all basic turn into local advertising. It's like a franchise that still wants to do local advertising because each
Right.
individual clinic needs their own because they generally are, like, still representative of the doctor or the dentist and still needs that local presence.
Yeah, it's a balance. Our local urgent care, for example, around here, they tend to be run either by Nuvance or by Yale. And that brand name is useful because it looks like, oh, yeah, you've got all this hoity-toity, background. But you also don't want to be part of just some generic system to your point, it's not McDonald's, right? You're not going in and expecting some sort of generic approach. You actually want to be able to talk to the doctor, and maybe even talk to the same one twice. That'd be, some kind of luxury right there. So yeah, there's a balance with
Mhm.
the local feeling and the network, which I think it's a little bit easier to do that in home services because we were talking about that earlier. There's a trend in these roll-ups where you buy, a plumber, an electrician, an HVAC person, and a maintenance contractor, put them all together, and now you've got, you know, Newtown Home Services, right? I live in
Right.
Newtown. Which is kinda cool because you can cross sell to the customers, you can talk to one person and have all your stuff dealt with as
Right.
the customer. As the owner, it's kinda cool because 'cause you've got, efficiencies and you've got a marketing angle there, which is nice. But you don't wanna be you don't want this sort of, national franchise approach where they don't know anything about you, they don't know your community, they just came in and opened a store. That's a little I mean, that'll work for Home Depot, it won't work for a services conglomerate like that.
Mhm.
You need to know your customers. Yeah. So, we've seen some consolidation in our vet we were just talking about earlier, they did that and they lost some of that personal touch, and I think there could be an opportunity for marketers to come in and say, "Hey, wait a minute, you lost something here. Let's see if we can get it back."
Sure. Yeah. The other side of that, though, is that they also still have to deliver on those promises. And if larger conglomerates come in, cut cost, cut service, they could change their front end marketing, but if the service is bad, then that's going to have a bad feedback loop, and then it's going to cause damage through reviews and referrals and everything else.
Yeah.
So I think that's where that'll create, I think, then opportunity back to small privately owned vets or dentists or doctors to provide
I
solutions
think
that
we'll
are
see an
higher quality.
equilibrium shift, maybe towards more corporate ownership and then, sort of downward spiral in in service and upward spiral in cost. And then there's always an opportunity there. The dinosaurs take over the world and the mammals come in, and all of a sudden, guess what? The mammals survived and the dinosaurs didn't, right?
Right.
So, any market shift is going to open up something. And you have a very good point there that if they're, if it, no matter how much premium branding you do, if it's not backed up by quality, I mean, honestly, that's part of premium branding. We don't just look at your messaging, we look at your patient experience. What do people think about their experience with you? Are they going to become advocates and go talk to their friends? And if they say, Dr. So and so is great, we want to have them have a reason to say why Dr. So and so is great. That's part of the front end marketing, but it's also part of the in clinic experience. We're just as concerned with that. And again, that's to a certain extent, some of the agentic AI can become a helper there. Better management of records, so you don't have to fill out the same form 6 times.
Yeah.
Better pre sort of prep for the actual visit, so the doctor is not completely at sea when he meets you for the first time. Um, there are things that we can do to improve the experience. The big companies can do that too, but they might not be doing it. Yeah. So we have to rebuild authenticity here, and there's no reason why a small business can't do that.
Right. It does have an element which I think is very important, but hard, especially for small practices and even large corporations to think about oftentimes when you're in marketing meetings, is a long term vision and strategy and really like building a strong foundation that's going to last longer versus short term thinking and tactics to get an immediate ROI or impact. But how have you handled that conversation with clients in the past, or how are you handling it now moving forward? The balance between a long term strategy and plan versus short term tactics.
Hmm. Sure. Well, to begin with, the people that we work with are not in startup. They're typically keeping the lights on, right? So they're not desperate. And I think they come into speaking with us based on our how we market ourselves. They come into speaking with us with that already in mind. We talk about what a premium brand is and why it's important, and it's not about next month's receivables. It's about the long term value of your business. So we open the conversation with that. And to a certain extent, they're kind of trained to think that way. If they've consumed any of our content, hopefully a lot of it, they come in with that thinking in mind. And, small business owners tend to ironically be a little bit more strategic, unless if they're gasping for revenue, that's another story. We just tell them, go out and buy a bunch of Facebook advertising. You'll get bodies
Yep.
in the door. That's the best
Yep.
way to do that. Paid advertising is still the fastest way. So via con Dios and come back to us when you've got your feet under you.
Right. Yeah.
But I think a lot of people, especially if they've been at it for a little while, they are thinking long term in ways that this is kind of the downfall of the whole private equity approach. I saw that when I was working for a network agency, which is not private equity, but it's multi-billion dollar, networks. I won't name the one I was working for, but you'd recognize the name. As soon as things started to get a little shaky in 2008, they laid off most of their talent. I mean, most of their senior people because they'd been around too long and they were making too much money. Guess what? The people left behind had no clue how to build a business. So they just kept doing what they were doing. And over time, that runs out of gas. You know, Agencies don't thrive by doing the same thing over and over again. They thrive through innovation, insight, bringing something to the client that the client can't do themselves. The people who stuck around at these agencies after the apocalypse, they didn't have that. They hadn't been around long enough. They hadn't seen what was going on at other companies enough. They weren't consultants. They were just operators. They were essentially order takers. That kind of approach turns your entire staff into a bunch of order takers. There's nobody thinking long term there. And I've seen that happen in private equity too. I was working with an agency who I won't name who got bought by private equity, and they just drove the account into the ground. They just had no idea how to work with the account that we were working on. It was a very difficult account. I will give them that. And my old business partner sold his business and walked away because he couldn't deal with it anymore. So, it's not for everybody, but you're not going to get that at the bean counter level.
Right.
You're not going to get it's a completely different business. You can't automate relationships. You can't quantify relationships. You have to use your right brain. You have to be a human, and you have to think long term. because they're thinking long term. They want to keep their jobs. They're concerned about, the client I'm talking about. Of course, they're concerned about quarterly results and not getting fired because they spent too much money. But they're also thinking, how am I going to build this brand over time? And 2 years from now, I'm going to be able to look back and say, yeah, we grew our revenue 10%. I have not seen that kind of thinking at the private equity level, unless it's something really obvious. We're going to grow our equity by buying three more businesses. That they can do. But repositioning our brand, changing our service offerings to meet the needs of our clientele better, not really happening at that level. You're looking at spreadsheets at that level, and that's about it. And a lot of this stuff doesn't show up on a spreadsheet.
Right.
It's brand equity, but it's not quantifiable.
Yeah. And it has a longer lag. Like your brand equity and value has a real long lag versus like if you just look at the month to month marketing results, is that you're only looking at what's the dollar in, dollar out. And oftentimes you'll cut things that would kind of build your brand over a longer term basis that are going to
Exactly.
then generate more revenue further down the line that you're cutting out. And it just comes from that mentality of just looking at what's my month to month numbers and like a short term vision. And we see it happen all the time from a paid ads perspective because you'll end up, some brands will end up just consolidating down to like your lowest funnel direct
Mm,
response paid
yeah.
advertising tactics, and it's like, yes, you can do that and you should have that element, but you're only thinking about the 5% of buyers that are in market at this
Yeah.
time that
Right.
everybody's trying to compete for. You're not thinking about the 90, 95% that need to be aware of your product or service or solution, but they're not ready. They're not in market to buy or they
Right.
don't
They're going to
need
buy
the
later. Yep.
service. They're going to
Yep.
buy
Yep.
later. And
Yep.
how do you build connection and relevance with them? And that's
Right.
why I think is like a really good, unique opportunity that especially like local advertisers, marketers, like a dentist office or a vet or a doctor can use that they weren't previously kind of cost prohibitive to use is now TV advertising because connected TV can be
Hmm.
so targeted where you can target down to like zip code levels
Yeah.
around a specific location. You can be very targeted. You can target by household income or homeowners or renters. There's so many ways to splice up and be very specific with your targeting that your media dollars can go really far and there's no bigger impact than TV. And then on top of that, then you can retarget them then on Facebook and Instagram and on display and all these other channels that I see it as like a really big opportunity that a lot of local advertisers don't even know that's available, but
Hmm.
it's so many good ways to build your brand and really expand your reach beyond just the 5% that are in market.
Absolutely. Yeah. You got to think about, where your future funnel is coming from, you know.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the other thing that keeps people out of these local approaches is the used car salesman factor. You see some obviously local ad that's just horrible. You know,
Right.
this is why they need smart marketers to help keep them out of that. You don't want to do that stuff yourself, and a lot of people do. And it's just like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
You're going to sell
The
me kitchen
ad
cabinets? You don't even, you can't even get on camera.
it's the branding and the messaging of the content is really
Yeah.
like what comes down is like so important with like really building. Some local advertisers have done it really well, but a lot of them are just really bad because they seem to just be very disconnected from the consumer and just like a really poor strategy or plan of how they're going to try to connect with their target audience.
Yeah, and the whole premium branding approach that we take, a lot of people get on camera and they start talking about themselves.
Right.
You know,
Yep.
I did this, I can do this for you. They have no relationship with the audience at all.
Mm,
They're not talking about how they, making the audience the hero and guiding them to success and what transformation they're going to go through after they have this beautiful kitchen or the pool or whatever it is. Your family's going to have a wonderful time. They're not talking about that. They're talking about, we can save you money and this thing will last forever. So they talk about the product. They don't talk about the emotional experience that the client is going to have. And, you know, good advertisers know that you have to do that. But to your point, the downfall of that local advertising is just misguided communication.
yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think there's a huge opportunity there. We're also talking a lot about YouTube because YouTube is essentially
Hmm.
free.
Yep.
And you can do a lot of the same kinds of things. You can educate your clientele. It might take a year and a half for them to actually buy from you, but fine. Your content will sit there forever. YouTube will bring you the audience if you keyword and describe correctly. Get vidIQ or something like that. and just keep that content going. But then people don't know how to do that. B, think they're going to do it wrong, and C, just don't have time. So there's an opportunity there for us too, and it could be very, very cost effective. So again, all of this stuff is designed to create a relationship between the brand spokesperson and the customer. It's that humanity, that where we're not sort of automating messaging that just goes in one ear and out the other at high volume.
Yeah, absolutely. What other common mistakes? I think those are really big ones of like talking about themselves and not talking about consumers' mindset where they are, and then how to elicit that emotional connection and position them as the hero in their own story. But what other common mistakes have you seen kind of local advertisers, healthcare marketers kind of make over the years that you think need to change over the next decade?
Well, a huge one is obviously competing on price. Once you do that, you're in a race with the bottom. There's just no way around it. And, premium brands take price off the table. If you're the go-to person for a certain procedure, service, whatever it is, in any niche, whether it's healthcare or something else, people aren't even going to ask. Look at Apple. Everybody uses Apple as the example, but people don't fight about pricing. I mean, my laptop. I'm not using it right now, but my laptop cost me $5,000. It's like 3 times at least of what I would have paid for a Windows machine, but it works. You know, I don't have to fuss with all this. I don't want to get into a platform war, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's they market these things, and we find the money. You know, same thing with high end cars. If you buy a Lamborghini, you're not gonna haggle with the sales guy.
Yep.
But if you want that, you're gonna find the money. So premium brands are all about that, and I see medical care, Botox injections, whatnot, coupons, $50 off. And back when I was in the CPG world, people were doing that kind of consumer packaged goods. There was always a tension between sales and marketing, right? So sales wanted to do the 50 cents off coupon, and marketing was like, no, 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 you're cheapening the brand. We don't want to do that. But the sales guys wanted to move the needle. Um, So you can do that, but there's a limit to how much you can do, and if there was a price war in the pizza shops in my neighborhood when I grew up in New York, and they got it down to a quarter a slice, and then half those people went out of business because they couldn't make any money.
Right.
So
Yep.
don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's how do you focus on increasing the value rather than decreasing price? That if
Right?
you
It's
increase the value and the outcome, because at the end of the day, people want the outcome. They want the outcome of I turn on my computer and it works, and I don't need to waste my time trying to fidget around with a bunch of stuff. Or
exactly,
I buy this, marketing program and I get a result. I get an outcome from it. I generate more business. It's like, what's the outcome that I'm getting from my healthcare activities? And if you end up competing on price, I think the biggest downside of that, and I think we see this most pricely affected I often see it in direct to consumer brands where people will just wait for the sale to happen. And are you training your customer to wait for the sale, wait for the discount? And if you do that, then you're basically artificially deflating your prices that may not be necessary, and you're training your customer to wait for those deflated prices rather than
exactly.
increasing the value and the outcome that the customer will get.
Well, you've trained them to think about, price to begin with,
Mhm.
and okay, if I'm thinking about price, obviously I want it lower. But let's just take that off the table. Look again. Let's come back to Apple. How do they build that brand? How do they talk about outcomes? In the early days of the Mac, Steve Jobs took out a full page ad in the New York Times about the Mac, and he talked about how much RAM it had, what the bus speed was, all this. Oh my God, forget about it. Nobody wants to read this.
Right.
Okay, didn't work. And Chai Day came up with the computers for the rest of us, with the person running through the auditorium, throwing the hammer at the screen. Nothing to do with the product. Didn't even discuss the product. Okay, you don't have to talk about the product. Of course, in healthcare, you have to talk about we got this machine and that machine, but put that in the background. The big healthcare brand that I spent all those years working for, they didn't do that. They led with this guy had a heart attack, and then 3 weeks later, he was back with his family. You
Wow.
know,
Nice. Yeah.
This guy had religious convictions that prevented him from having the surgery. We found a way around that, and now he's having a good time with his grandkids.
Nice. Yeah.
It's about the outcome. And again, look at how Apple does it. They don't talk about the machine. They don't talk about the product. Okay? Pepsi, same thing. Last thing you want to do is talk about the product. The product is probably poisonous. So you talk about, this skateboarder who's having a wonderful life. If you're Apple, you talk about, these creatives who are dancing with the headphones on, the Silhouette campaign or the Think Different campaign. You talk about Miles Davis and Muhammad Ali, Bob Dylan. These creative geniuses that we want to be like, we emulate. We want that experience. We want that creativity. And yeah, you're going to help me with that? Good. I'll take it. Take my money. Okay. At that point, you're buying what you wanted your whole life. You're buying the best version of yourself that you can get. And is the promise overblown? Yeah, of course it is. But, people are going to pay for something that gets them along the road towards that. And if you can keep the focus on the outcome, as you said, that's the perfect phrasing for it. Focus on the outcome, focus on the transformation that the person's going to go through. And then maybe give a little hint of what happens if you don't do that.
Mm.
If you don't buy into this, then you're stuck being, struggling with your recording device or, drinking something that doesn't make you feel that good. I don't know,
Yeah,
whatever it is.
yeah. Pain's often a stronger motivator,
It
to
can be.
make
You don't
make
want to
the
lean on
attachment,
it too much.
avoidance of
It's
pain.
it's it's like salt. You don't want to put too much salt in your flour, but a little bit, yeah, just for that little tang of, you know what? I really want to do this. And then at that point, and this is basic sales technique, right? And so when price objections come up, you shift the conversion to, okay, but what would you get out of it? If I can increase your revenue by 10% and you're at $1 million a year, that's $100,000. Would you pay $10,000 for a service that would get you there? Of course I would. So with any other product or service, it may not be a financial transaction. It might be, now you're going to feel good about yourself. Now you're going to be the version of yourself in the mirror that you want to see, and your confidence and your energy is going to come back because you're not, struggling to overlook some flaw that you feel you have. But what's that worth? What's that worth to you? At that point, price just leaves the discussion completely.
Yeah, absolutely. You're obviously kind of going down the route of also offering AI, agentic services and capabilities and all of that. And, you mentioned before our call that you just went to a big conference on it, but what is your kind of opinion of how you see these new AI content agents, all of these impacting marketing, positive, negative outcomes from those?
Sure. Look, a lot of jobs are going to change, and there's been a lot in marketing where we made money by execution. The
Hmm.
execution is getting it a lot faster, a lot easier, a lot cheaper. Is it going to be better? I don't know. Is Mac typography better than the handset typography that we had before that? I was paying $35 a foot for type before the Mac came along, and it was beautiful. The Mac typography wasn't quite as good, but it was almost as good, and it was free. Once you had the machine, now you're saving them. Now, production shops and the production pit in a big agency, they're losing a lot of revenue now because of this, because they're not marking up that $35 a foot anymore. So agencies that are making a lot of money running campaigns at scale and things of that nature, they might find their revenue being challenged in a big way right now. Not only are they going to have to do things faster, their clients are going to expect reductions in cost because they know that AI can do this. They can buy a tool off the internet that'll do almost as good of a job. And to the point with the typography, 80% is good for free is better than 100% is good at a high cost. So a lot of agencies that are making a lot of money from execution and production, they're going to be challenged. I think we all have to move more towards strategy. And, one of the things I want to do in offering agentic AI to our customers, we're eating our own dog food, we're building our own tools, but I want to help them help their staffs do more, not only for back office operations like, our financials and, billing and appointment setting and all that kind of stuff, the front end marketing, but also customer care. How can we do more? Because we have more power. We have more compute at our fingertips now. So, we can do a better job of, bringing customer records up as needed, of, processing test analysis in a faster way, of, following up with the customer, making suggestions as to other things that they might benefit from that they're not thinking about now that are, especially in the small clinics. I think people are kind of overwhelmed if they're busy and they can't get to all that stuff. Patient goes home and the doctor or the practitioner thinks, "Oh, wow, I should have thought about that." So I think AI can help supplement that quality of care. to a certain extent, and we're finding that we don't have all the answers yet, but that's where we're going with.
For sure.
We also want to look at tying in, let's say things like wearables. I've got this Apple Watch on. It's got my heart rate, my sleep patterns, all kinds of stuff like that. Let's find a way to pull that into the patient experience too, so the doctor doesn't have to go over that with the client. They come to the interview prepared. So there's ways of plussing up not only operations but also patient experience, and that ties into the sort of premium branding in the front end too, because you're really showing care for your client. You're finding ways to make it better for them, so they don't have to fill out the same form 5 times, or answer the same 2 questions. So I see it fitting in on a number of levels, and frankly we're not there yet in terms of knowing what all the possibilities are, but we are developing that, and we have good partners to help us with that.
Yeah, we're kind of right in the middle of figuring all these out, right?
Yeah,
These things have changed so fast and so quickly
and it
faster than
continues
any
to.
other
Yeah,
previous
yeah,
technology. I think that what's possible today is completely different than what was possible a year ago, and it continues to get better. But we'll see if I'm just curious if there's going to be a point of diminishing returns where the next release isn't as good as the previous ones. But the
could
agent
be.
capabilities are pretty incredible of what they're able to do. But what I kind of see happening though, I think you're completely right, is the strategic work. Because I think all of the tactical execution is going to get automated away very quickly in terms of what agents and how fast these platforms can work and across how many platforms they can work. But the strategic thinking of knowing what 80% of it you should take and what 20% you need to adjust and fix, and what's a good outcome or a good output versus a bad output, and how to design it and train it in the right way. I think those are going to be extremely valuable and important. And fundamentally, marketers are in a service-based industry, and that the service of marketing and branding and execution and all these things still needs to be done. And I think a lot of brands, while small to mid-sized brands may try to just take those things in-house, primarily making it a financial decision, I think the medium to large brands are going to continue to need that high level specialty support and strategic layer that they don't get internally or don't have the resources or bandwidth to figure out how to design the agents, how to create the workflows, how to organize all the content, what's good versus what's bad. And I think that's the big opportunity for marketers over the next 10 years.
Absolutely. Um, and to your point, I don't know if there's going to be a point of diminishing returns or not. I don't know at what point it
Right.
levels off.
Yeah.
Who
We'll
knows?
see.
Nobody knows. I mean, people will pretend they do. I think there's an important part of this where we have to start using our own judgment about what to apply compute power to and what not to. A very smart account manager once taught me that you can't automate relationships. And another thing that's difficult to automate is insight. AI agents can scan the world for all the information. Let's assume that they've got all the information. What they don't have yet and may never have is the gift of analogy, that we humans can take a situation from a completely unrelated field and say, you know what, that reminds me of something, and then apply it to the case at hand. Another thing that we bring to the table that small marketers are going to struggle with is, or small companies marketing themselves are going to struggle with is, I've seen this 20 times. Your situation is a little bit different, but it has a lot in common with these other 20 things that I've seen.
Yeah, for sure.
So, we're outside the bottle reading the label. You're inside the bottle and you can't read the label. So, that, and companies have always relied on consultants and agencies for that outside perspective that,
Outside perspective, for sure.
we've been here for 6 years and this is our world. This is what we see. We don't see what's going on at the competitors over there. We only see their external
Or in other industries
or
and
another
how
industry.
yeah,
Right.
other
Right.
industries that they're not focused on. I think you kinda get the measure, like, what is the welder doing compared to this, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
it's gonna be different. Yeah, or you
Yeah.
can provide a different perspective or different solution off of what another industry is doing that an internal marketing team's not gonna see.
Right. And at that point, we've had a little bit of a kind of a bias towards new thinking from younger members of our industry, which is appropriate because new thinking is always needed. But there's a place here for people who've been around the block a bunch of times. I say that as somebody who's been around the block a bunch of times. But there's wisdom. Okay,
Mhm.
there's such a thing as judgment, and The ability to not only see the analogies and judgment calls we were talking about, but also to have a sense of relationship. At this AI conference I was just at, somebody, one of the presenters was talking about how she was sending out all these LinkedIn messages to people, and she was really smart about it. She's quoting recent posts they'd made and articles they'd written and all this kind of stuff. And somebody got back to her and said, "Hey, thanks for responding to the article I wrote on so and so." And the presenter thought to herself, "Well, I didn't actually read that. You know, my AI process read it, and I
Yeah.
have nothing to do with this." So
Right.
she's feeling a little bad about that, and I thought, you know what, you're onto something there because you just automated bullshit,
Yeah.
basically.
100%. Yeah.
Don't do that. You know, humans still have value. Humans are the ones driving the bus here. Okay, an AI isn't going to start a business. It doesn't want anything.
Right.
Humans do this so we can feed our families and so we can do good things for our communities and things of that nature. So let's not overdo it. Let's remind ourselves that we humans still have value, even if there are fewer of us involved, because we don't need all these, sort of low level people just pushing ads out the door every day. Even if we don't need that, we still need wisdom, consultancy, judgment,
Mhm.
the perspective, things of that nature.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I hope that it continues to let people do high value work
Hmm.
that's important to them and automate things that are mundane that would just be a machine who's better off doing. But last question for you. If you give your younger self one piece of advice when you're starting your agency, what would it be?
Start an agency sooner. I spent too much of my time making money for other people. Honestly, I learned a lot, there was no question there, but, and be willing to change. I think Darwin said that the species that survive are the ones that can handle change. I think all of us are becoming internal change managers now. You have to be able to roll the logs without falling into the water. If I stuck to my skills as a production artist before the computer, I would have left the business. And people did, retouchers, typesetters. They said, I don't want to do this. And they went and did something else with their lives. If you want to keep going, you've got to be able to, just jump on the next thing. Just do it. Just get in there. Don't wait.
Yeah, the only
And that's really
constant
it.
is change
Yep. Yep.
that we're all
And
dealing
it's
with.
happening fast, and you might as
Absolutely.
well just jump on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Say
Good.
more. Thank you so much for joining me.
James, thank you so much. I appreciate the conversation.